Okay, so here's our last lesson of Unit 4, and this is just another method of solving quadratic equations. This method will solve any quadratic equation you can think of. Now, the idea behind this lesson is that this is a formula. What I don't want, the first thing I don't want to teach you guys to do is I don't want to teach you to memorize, okay? Memorization is good, but in math, there are way too many formulas for you to memorize. What I want you to do is I want you to be able to analyze a formula and use it. So when you take the checkpoint on this, you should be using this template for the quadratic formula. I don't expect you guys to memorize this. Be able to use it though. So what the quadratic formula does is it finds the solutions of any quadratic. So the quadratic formula is you're finding an x value. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So this goes back to us recognizing a, b, and c in our quadratic equations. So an example of this, I'm going to identify a, b, and c in example 1. A is 1, b is 7, c is 6. So the way I'd set up the quadratic formula is x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 6, 4ac, all over 2a, 2 times 1. So essentially, you're substituting in values, and then you're simplifying using the order of operations. So my formula becomes negative 7 plus or minus. This becomes 49 minus 24, all over 2. And I just keep chopping away at that. Negative 7 plus or minus, this would be 25 over 2. So I've got to do two different operations. X can be negative 7, let's say negative 7 plus 25. Negative 7 plus 25 is 18. 18 divided by 2, one of our solutions is 9. So that's me just taking negative 7 plus 25. Then I take negative 7 minus 25. That's negative 32 divided by 2. My other solution is negative 16. And that allows me to find two solutions. So that plus or minus is because we are taking the square root of something. We talked about that before. The square root of something always has two solutions unless it's 0. So the thing we're doing here, we found two real solutions. Okay? Two real solutions. Two real numbers. We didn't have the square root of a negative number. So this square root is going to tell us. Whatever the result of this square root is going to tell us the number and types of solutions we have. So an example of an equation with one real solution, just getting used to it, and obviously use the formula to reference, but a is 2, b is negative 8, c is 8. So my quadratic formula is negative b, which would be just positive 8, plus or minus square root of b squared, so negative 8 squared minus 4ac, 4 times 2 times 8. And then at the bottom, all over 2a, 2 times 2. So this is 8 plus or minus negative 8 squared is 64, minus 4 times 2 times 8, also 64. All over 4. So this essentially is 8 plus or minus the square root of 0, which is just 0 over 4. So 8 plus 0 is the same as 8 minus 0. So we only have one solution, and that solution is 2. So if this square root ends up being 0, that means we have one real solution. Okay? So it all depends on what happens inside this square root. The main thing here is what you need to remember. Following signs is very, very, very important. Before you subtract, make sure you multiply all three of these numbers, 4, 2, and 8. That's the biggest set of mistakes I see in this lesson, is people not keeping track of the signs. You miss one sign, it throws off the rest of the solutions, or the solutions we find. It's a lot like when we solved systems of equations. You do a lot of work only to find that you made a mistake in the first step. So just take your time and work through it. It gets better as you go, I think. So in example 3, we're going to find one with imaginary solutions, meaning I. So before we get started, we got to notice this equation is not set equal to 0. So I'm going to get it set equal to 0 by subtracting 5 from both sides. And that's a big, big change, because in this case, C, instead of being positive 5, it's negative 5. That's important to know. So when I set up my quadratic, negative b plus or minus b squared, 2 squared, minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 5, all over 2a. 2 times negative 1. This is why what I said before is important, because we have 4 times negative 1 times negative 5. So this is really 4 minus 20, because I have a positive times a negative times a negative. And this is all over negative 2. So when I simplify this, it's negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 16. So from lesson 4.6, complex numbers, we know we have to pull out I from this. I know the square root of 16 is 4, but this is really negative 2 plus or minus 4i all over negative 2. So the way I would show my solutions is I would notice I have a 2, a 4, and a 4. I can divide all of these things by 2. So really, you could think of this as, and I'm going to simplify it further, but negative 1 plus or minus 2i over negative 1, which, if I divide by a negative, this would be just 1 plus or minus 2i. And that would be my two solutions. 1 plus 2i, 1 minus 2i. If you left the plus or minus, that's okay. So this is when our square root, the inside is, didn't mean to erase, when the inside of our square root becomes negative, okay? So there's 3 different types of solutions we can have. We can have 1 real, 2 real, or 2 imaginary. Those are the possibilities. So this next page kind of goes into that, the discriminant. And this is going to be big in our next unit. But if the inside of the square root is greater than 0, that means we have 2 real solutions, meaning the graph hits the x-axis at 2 points. If the inside of our square root is 0, if the discriminant is 0, that means our graph hits the x-axis at 1 point, meaning it has 1 real solution, singular. And then the final one, if our discriminant's less than 0, meaning it's negative, that means it has no real solutions, but it still has those 2 imaginary solutions. So in example 4, really all we're doing is we are finding b squared minus 4ac to help us tell what kinds of solutions we have. So we're finding b squared minus 4ac. We're finding what's inside that square root, inside the quadratic formula. So this is 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. So this is 36 minus 20. So that discriminant would be 16. And all we're looking at is the sign of this result, okay? So the sign is positive. That means we have 2 real solutions. In part B, b squared minus 4ac, 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. This is 36 minus 36, which is 0. That means our quadratic hits the x-axis once. That means we have one real solution. And I guess you're going to predict on this one, but we'll still do it. B squared minus 4ac. 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 13. So this is 6 squared, which is 36, minus, this would end up being 52, I believe. I'll double check that. 4 times 1 times 13 is 52. So this is negative 16. So that means 2 imaginary solutions. Okay? Means our graph doesn't hit the x-axis ever. So this is just condensing it to looking at a part of the quadratic formula. So this is an important part of it, though, because it tells us the types of solutions. So, guided practice, it's just finding that discriminant, just what we did in the last example. So finding b squared minus 4ac. So it's figuring out that square root part. It's just focusing in on that part of the quadratic formula. So there's a good chance for you to pause the video, try these out, check your solutions with me, and then past that you'll be ready for some practice and then the checkpoint. Okay, so to round this out, I'm going to explain this fairly quickly, but the main thing is b squared minus 4ac. Pay attention to the signs because this helps you evaluate the quadratic formula further on. So, talking about types of solutions. 5, I got 2 imaginary solutions because I got negative 4 as my discriminant. 6, I got positive 4, which means 2 real solutions. 7, I got 0, which means 1 real solution. And then number 8, I got positive 20, which means 2 real solutions. So it's not only thinking about how to use the formula, but how parts of the formula give us clues as to what types of solutions our equation has. So I'm going to give you some practice on this, give you the checkpoint, and after that you're going to have a short quiz on the last few lessons.